So let's see if I can get it to, okay, that's better. So just a really quick review. We've been talking about, and this is kind of an overview of the course. So we talked about economics and what it is generally. We said the scientific study of resource allocation mechanisms. So that's our defined um, uh, topic, what we've done so far. And then we said, well, for our purposes, um, there are really two main concepts, and they're all entailed in this in this first fundamental welfare theorem. And we said, really, those ideas boil down to finding or describing the equilibrium, and then secondly, describing the welfare implications or properties of the equilibrium. So in this class, that's just what we're going to do. You'll see every model that we bring up, we're going to describe the equilibrium. We're going to figure out how to find where the points cross. It's going to be a little bit more complicated when we talk about Nash equilibrium and other concepts like that. But we'll have a couple of equations and we'll solve those equations. Those equations will tell us how much of the thing is going to be produced and consumed in society. By thing, I mean, goods, service, whatever. And it'll tell us at what price the people in society are trading it. And then the second thing that we're going to do is once we find the price and the quantity, we'll describe what's the level of net social benefit that's generated, which is how we measure our welfare properties. But as we go through the course, you'll notice that there are three main areas in the course where we talk about these things. So the overview of the course topics really break down into three main areas. The first area is just supply and demand. So that's basically a third of the class. And the next section is what we call consumer theory. And you could also say it's the consumer choice problem. Because consumer theory is how we describe what the consumer is doing. And in the consumer choice problem, we talk about the consumer's budget and how the consumer decides what goods to buy. But notice that this is really demand in detail. Okay. So, and then the last part of the course is what we call producer theory. And some people also call this the theory of the firm, because it's firms or business firms. It's another word for business. So you see the theory of a business or businesses, and um, the profit maximization problem. Um, maximization problem. And this is really, in simple terms, talking more in depth about how firms make their supply decisions. So, and I'll spread this out a little bit. Okay. So those are our three main topics for the course, and then the course is done. So that's your like preview. Now, obviously, there's a lot of stuff in between. When we talk about supply and demand, we'll talk about government policies like taxation and price control policies and how they affect the equilibrium and welfare and those sorts of things. But that's the overview of the course in a nutshell, as they say. So right now we've started to talk about the first fundamental welfare theorem, and we'll talk about it from now pretty much until the end of the class, because it entails all of our topics that we want to talk about. But we defined welfare, and now we want to move on. We're talking about the demand and supply model, and so let's talk about demand a little bit more. And I think that I already told you guys. I have to go back and check my notes, but it's okay if we review it quickly. If you guys have a question about something, just go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'll move or speak up or raise your hand or something. So we'll begin with the demand relationship. And so demand is a relationship between, and by the way, if you guys didn't join the earlier session for whatever reason, I made sure there was enough space for everybody to join the activity. And if you guys didn't sign up for the activity, you're on your own if you don't do it. Like, I think this is your last chance if you're going to do it. I've said to people in the past that if you're not in the activity, you don't do well in the course, just remember I recommended you do that. So you're taking the responsibility and the risk on your own. I mean, there are lots of reasons to join the activity that are smart. One of them, like I said, is that you end up with an extra unit of upper division credit, and there's really not any additional responsibility in terms of work that you have to submit. But nevertheless, if for whatever reason you decided you don't want to join the activity, I'm telling you now, like I said before, you guys are on notice that you've been warned and recommended to do something that'll be helpful, and if you didn't, then you have to deal with the consequences on your own. So there's this relationship, and so hopefully the reason why I brought up the activity is that here we're talking about all the theory, but at the end of the day, we're going to want to use a theory to interpret and solve problems. So we say it's a relationship between price and quantity demanded. And in particular, we want to emphasize that that it's described by the law of demand. And the law of demand just says there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay. So now there's two ways to really interpret the information on the demand curve. And you guys are for sure familiar with one of them, but you want to make sure that you understand both, because the first interpretation really speaks to that first issue of what is the equilibrium. Okay. So for example, I'll draw a little demand curve here. And so here's our demand curve. And I'll just label it as D. And you guys know that we are measuring dollars for price on the vertical axis, and we're measuring quantity on the horizontal axis. And let's say $5. And I'll put a little point there. Be a little bit bigger than that. Okay. And down here, we'll put 10. Okay. And I think last time we also mentioned, but I'll put over as an aside here, that every individual has a demand curve for every good. Market demand curves are the, and I'll put horizontal, I put in parentheses. It's important, but I don't want to distract from the big idea. Market demand curves are the sum of individual demand curves in, well, I'll say for a particular good. Okay. So now I'll ask you guys really quickly. Okay, I'm talking about $5. So let's see. Emily, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
How's it going this morning?
Good. Just cold. My house is cold for some reason.
Thank goodness, right? It's been blazing hot for the last couple of weeks. I'm glad it cooled down.
Waking up this morning and feeling cold air, I was like, what? What is this?
Yeah, but it's only supposed to last for a couple days. It's supposed to be
Yeah.
back up to like 106 within like 5 days, which I'm kind of dreading, but I'm hoping that's the last bit of summer. Um, it can drag on like that through October. So I'm hoping it cools down. Anyway, so so you can see the whiteboard, and can you see that I pointed out $5 there?
Yes.
So interpret for me uh, what this point means. Let's say this is Emily's demand for Starbucks Frappuccinos, because that's about what they cost,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Um, so how do I interpret that?
That I'm actually not too sure.
Oh, okay. So, hmm. Well, before I let you go, I'll ask, does anybody else want to take a swing at this? If we do,
Yes.
okay, so who is speaking?
Z.
What's that?
Z.
I can't
Z.
hear.
No. Hi,
Oh,
can you hear me?
okay, Z.
Yes. We've been talking
Okay,
about that.
okay.
All
So
right.
Z,
Cool.
so Z, what do you help Emily out? What's the interpretation here?
The interpretation is at the price of $5, it'll be 10 units of goods demand, which is like you will buy 10 bottles of Starbucks if it costs at $5.
Yeah. And like we talked about, I think a little bit last time, and maybe I can move this over a little bit so it lines up better with the point. But so at five, what this point says is that at $5, if this is Emily's monthly demand, I won't say weekly because now my daughters sometimes have lots of Starbucks. So it could be in a week, but we'll just say in a month, right? And I think a grande is $5.35. But at $5, this point is on Emily's demand curve and it's associated with this quantity value. This is the quantity axis, right? Of 10. So what Z said is right. At $5, that's the point on the demand curve. Emily would purchase 10 Starbucks Frappuccinos in a month if this was her monthly demand. So 5, the point says it's associated with the quantity of 10. At a price of 5, the quantity demanded is 10. Or if we want to be more colorful, and as simple as that, at a price of 5, the quantity demanded is 10. And if we want to be more colorful, we say, make sure we, instead of saying just quantity demanded, we say at $5, Emily purchases 10 Frappuccinos in a month. So, Emily, does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Were you thinking anything like that, or did you just look at it and go, bah?
Um, I was looking at it, I was thinking it was that, but I couldn't really find the words to say something. Kind of froze when you called out my name. I was just like, ah, okay.
It's so cold and it just got colder.
Yeah, literally.
Okay. Well, okay, just to hammer the point home, I'm going to do one more and give you another chance here. You're like, oh, just what I was looking for. So, Starbucks sometimes, as you guys probably know, they have their like sales where basically it's buy one get one free frappuccinos, or they have like their happy hour where you pay half price. And okay. And okay. Trying to line all this stuff up. Okay. So Emily, you with us?
Yeah.
Okay, so what about this line here? And you want to interpret that for us?
Yeah. At the price of 250, there'll be 17, I guess, units or frappuccinos or whatever demanded.
Yeah. So again, and you might want to write the language down just so you know, but all we're saying is at a price of 250, there's the point on the demand curve. It's associated with a quantity demanded of 17. And again, if we want to be more descriptive about the particular example, if frappuccinos are 250, Emily is going to purchase 17 of them. That's what it says. And notice we're reading those values off of the demand curve. Price of 250 is associated with the quantity demanded of 17. So that's fine. And this is, and the reason why I asked Emily if it was like if you were going there is because honestly, so dare I ask? So Emily, who did you have for principles of economics?
I took principles at my community college.
Oh, good. It wasn't me.
Yeah, no, it wasn't you. No. I took principles with a professor at my community college. I don't even remember her name. I think she
Okay.
retired the year after.
See, now that's good because I don't have to feel like I didn't like press hard enough for this, information to go in. That I always worry about that a little bit when I ask because I do teach principles at Cal Poly. So yeah, but I try, to emphasize these things. But yeah, so everybody here has had principles and passed principles successfully. In fact, I imagine most of you guys and girls um, got a good grade in principles, or you wouldn't have decided to be an econ major. But um, you know, this type of thing is, I mean, we're just reviewing stuff from principles right now for the most part. I mean, we're being maybe a little bit more sophisticated about it, a little bit more detailed, kind of like laying groundwork for stuff we're going to talk about coming. But this is just basic principle stuff. We're interpreting information off of demand curve. So I guess I was going to say, Emily, so like hopefully the idea of what we're talking about is like kind of familiar, anchored someplace. So I guess I'm not going to ask details about your principal's professor. You said it was a while ago and whatever. So I just imagine that she did a good job and you're just shaking off the dust. Um, but yeah, I mean, we should all be able to interpret information from a demand curve this way. Okay. So now, so that's the first, and actually, what I'll do really quickly is I will go to a new whiteboard and just write this. And so to interpretation of information on the demand curve. And notice, I mean, I hopefully I'm not saying anything profound, but you guys should realize that we're calling it a demand curve, even though it's a straight line. That's fine. curve is just a general term for locus of points in the Cartesian plane that represent a function. So it can be a straight line, that's fine. And so the first one is how much would be purchased at a particular price. Okay. Now, there is another interpretation which is equally important. Okay. So, and that is what is the, and I'll put in quotes, value of the marginal unit to the consumer. And this is also something that is, you know, if you had a good principles instructor, they should have told you about. But sometimes it's something that's sort of missed, and it becomes really important for us. Okay. So Emily, are you still with me? Oh, since we were talking.
Yeah.
Okay. So now check this out. So we know at a price of 250 that 17 units would be demanded, or you'd purchase 17 frappuccinos. But notice this, right? If we start off at the quantity and we say, oh, at 17, remember the horizontal axis goes from 0, right? And I didn't put the origin on the axis just because I'm trying to, you know, be quick about these diagrams. But this is the origin. And, you know, we go from, you know, zero units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to 17. So this says, notice at 250 per unit, right? This is the unit price. 17 would be purchased. But notice that if we raise the price just a little bit, we're at a different point on the demand curve. Can you see that, Emily?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means for the 17th one, if I were to raise the price to, let's say, $2.75, would you still buy it?
Yeah, but I wouldn't hit 17, so to say I'd probably only get 16.
Oh, so yeah. So see, I guess my question wasn't really clear. I wasn't saying would you still buy any units of the product. I'm saying would you still buy the 17th?
Oh, no, because it's
No.
not the price that I find convenient.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as we raise the price, your quantity demanded falls. In particular, if it's 7 at the 17th unit, if the demand curve says that's associated with a price of 250, if I even raise the price to 251, you'll no longer purchase 17, right? You'll purchase something less.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Think about it for a minute. I'm saying, okay, this is your last unit you're purchasing. It's what we would call your marginal unit. And for the time being, you can associate the word marginal with this last unit concept. Just notice that what's the last unit will depend on the situation, right? If you're purchasing 10 at a price of $5, then the marginal unit is the 10th unit. If you're purchasing 17 at 250, then the marginal unit is the 17th unit. So, but for that last unit that you purchase, if you raise the price a little bit, then the consumer would no longer purchase it, right? So in that sense, right, the price associated with that 17th unit, the 250, is like the value of it, right? Because what the demand curve tells us is that, hey, you'd be willing to purchase it at 250, but if somebody says, well, I want to charge you anything above that, like 270, you're like, nope, not worth it to me. So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that seem like value to you if you know you say no, I don't want it anymore because the price is too high now. You exceeded my value for the good.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a special term that we use in economics for that, and I'll go back to the other page and say that the height of the demand curve and reveals the consumers, and this is willingness to pay for the marginal unit of the good. And that's just another way of being specific and saying, like, I'm not talking about purchasing all 17 units in a bundle. I'm talking about the 17th unit, the last one, or the 10th unit. So this is our second interpretation, and it's important. And so I want you guys to be familiar with it. There's a lot of stuff that we have, you know, to say about it, but it's important information, right? The demand curve doesn't only tell us at particular prices how much of the good would be purchased. It also reveals to us for any particular unit of the good, by looking at the height of the demand curve, we can see the willingness to pay of the consumer for that unit. Because again, our analysis says, well, if the price is raised a little bit, they won't purchase that unit anymore. So that must be their value. That's how we would interpret their value for the good. Now, I want to say a little bit more about willingness to pay. And so the willingness to pay, and sometimes we abbreviate that way, for the good is actually the maximum marginal willingness to pay. We already talked about marginal because marginal is for that particular unit of the good, right? And but maximum means that if we go back to our diagram here and we take a look at it, so what's the maximum you'd be willing to pay for that 17th unit of the good? Well, it's that price associated with it. It's the 250, and I know that because if I raise the price a little bit more, the consumer doesn't purchase the good anymore. But we say maximum willingness to pay because it's also pretty clear that if I was to charge any price 250 or less than 250, right, like $2, then of course the consumer would be willing to pay $2. They would still purchase the good. So value in our way of thinking about, in an economics way of thinking about the good, value is really a measure of the maximum amount that the consumer would be willing to pay for the good. And so that information is available on the demand curve, and you should be familiar with it. You should have no problem looking at a demand curve and saying, oh, at 250, the quantity demand is 17, and the willingness to pay for the 17th unit is 250. Those two concepts should just go back and forth in your mind very easily. So I'll stop for just a second and ask, did everybody understand what I said? I said it once, I said it slowly, intentionally, so you guys could be okay with it. But if anybody has any questions or thoughts about anything that I said, please put something in the chat or ask a question. Okay, everybody good? Okay, so now this may seem a little abstract, at least what I'm going to talk about next. So using the willingness to pay to measure consumer welfare and society's welfare. Okay, so this is really kind of a thought experiment, and so let me talk to somebody else for a minute. So James, are you there? James Berrigan? Okay. How about Joseph? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Joseph. So imagine for a minute that we don't produce any goods and services. Okay. But instead, so like there's not Starbucks, and you don't go down to Starbucks, and there aren't people at Starbucks that sit there and make your drink for you.
Okay.
But it's some alien civilization they have. Have you guys? Is anybody? Well, I don't know if you guys have, but you could. You guys ever watch Star Trek?
Yeah.
Yeah, Star Trek. Like they walk into their dining hall, and they have like a little food producer thing. Maybe it looks like a microwave or whatever, but they just say steak and potatoes, and then it materializes and it's there, right?
Yeah.
And they don't swipe, they don't pay. It's just like, give me food. So, but imagine that that's kind of what Starbucks is like. There's an alien civilization, and you don't pay for anything. They just give you this stuff, right? So, and this is still our demand curve, right? So obviously there's a benefit to society, society being all of the people out there that consume Starbucks, of this alien civilization just giving us this stuff. But how would we measure in dollars if the alien civilization was to provide 17 free Starbucks a day? What's the value to society from that alien gift? You have any idea, James? Like how we might approach that problem?
Um, would it be the value of whoever gets it? That came out wrong, but like the 17
Yeah.
units who get it would be. I think it has something to do with the who gets it.
Well, yeah, it does. And because it could be worth different amounts to different people, right? I don't know if you guys have ever had this happen to you. It's happened to us a couple of different times. We've gone through Starbucks and they made a drink like wrong for the car that was in front of us. And they're just like, hey, we got this free, caramel frappuccino. You guys want it? And a lot of times we're like, like I wouldn't drink that anyway. So no, like save it for the next person. I don't want it. It's not worth anything to me. I've already got my drink. But sometimes, you're like, yeah, sure. I'll take it to my sister or something. And because there's somebody who would like that drink. But the point is it's just like a gift out of nowhere. But if you were willing to pay something for it and you didn't have to, then your willingness to pay would measure the value to you. And so what I want to point out is if the alien civilization, and you're right about this, James, this is an implicit assumption of the way that we do things in economics. Notice that the people that get the first few units from our demand curve, they're the ones with the highest willingness to pay, the highest value for the good. So we never have this weird thing happen where we only have 10 units of the good, but they all end up being given to people over here at the bottom of the demand curve with a low value for the good. And you guys might wonder why we make that assumption, because obviously in reality that doesn't always happen. But in economic theory, economists assume there are zero transactions costs. Okay, zero transactions costs, and I'll write that on the other board in a minute. But I'll just repeat it for you here. Zero transactions costs means that if somebody ends up with a good that they don't value as much as someone else in society, then they can just trade with that person. It's like people scalping tickets to a concert. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not. I've got a brother-in-law, and what he does is he will, maybe a year in advance, as soon as he can, he'll purchase tickets, a lot of times to concerts that he doesn't even want to go to. And he normally gets them for a good price because he's one of the first people to purchase them. And then later on, he'll resell those tickets, usually online, to somebody else for a much higher price. And every once in a while, well, I actually could say actually quite often, he ends up stuck with tickets that he can't sell and nobody else wants, and he's waited too long. And so my sister and my brother-in-law are always going to concerts all the time for different stuff that they don't even really care about. And they're like, oh yeah, it was good. But the main point is that zero transactions cost just means that people with a low value can sell a good for a higher price to people who have a high value, and they both can benefit. So the way that the demand curve is constructed, with high value consumers ending up with the good first, that would always happen in a world in which people who ended up with the good who didn't want it very much could trade it to people who didn't have the good who had a higher value. So the first few units of the good are always assumed to go to the highest value consumers. So that being the case, right, the value that these people place on the good, if it's given to them, the high value consumers, are the ones that determine what's the value to society. Now, society is just a collection, right, of people. And if some of the people get the good and others don't, the ones that get the good, their willingness to pay determines, the value for the group as a whole. The people that don't get the good, their you know, the value to them doesn't matter. They didn't get it. So, you know, they got something worth 0. So basically, to get down to the analysis, if the aliens gave us 17 free frappuccinos, right? Then hopefully I can look at the area of this trapezoid. So this should look familiar here. I'll try to color it in. Is going to measure the sum of the willingness to pay of all the consumers that get the good. Okay, so I'll go back to you, James, really quickly. Are you still there? James?
This is
Or
Joseph.
Joseph. I was talking to Joseph. Joseph, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. So you see, so if there are 17 frappuccinos given out, and we assume that the people with the highest value are the ones that get them, right? Then the highest value person gets the first one, and the value to them, they didn't pay anything for it, but they have some value, and we don't have it on our graph here because I only put a couple different values here. But let's just say it's $10. That's how much they would have paid for it, but they didn't have to. So they got like a gift worth $10. Do you see what I mean? And that's the first person, and that would be the first little slice of area here. And then the second person gets a frappuccino, and maybe it's worth $9 to them. So we add their value to it. And then the person that gets the 10th one gets a gift worth $5. And the person that gets the 17th gets a gift worth $2.50. If we add all of those values together, we'll end up with a measurement of the area of this trapezoid, which is the area underneath the demand curve. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a special name for that. It's the total social benefit. And there's actually another name for the demand curve. And it's actually sometimes called the marginal benefit curve. So the relationship is that benefit is measured in terms of willingness to pay. The marginal willingness to pay is the height of the demand curve for any particular unit of the good. And so we can call the demand curve the marginal benefit curve. And notice there are two kind of subtle things at play here. When I was talking to Joseph, I was saying, hey, let's assume there's consumer 1 and they get the first frappuccino. It's worth $10 to them. The second person in line gets the second frappuccino. It's worth $9 to them, and so on. We add up all those values. So I'm adding up the willingness to pay for each of those individuals, and as I add each additional unit, then each successive unit becomes the marginal unit of analysis. So becomes the last one, right? As I add one more and one more. But if it was just one individual, if all of these units were going to, so the transition I made is I was talking about Emily's demand for frappuccinos, and then I talked about, you know, like the market demand for frappuccinos, because I talked about different people getting it. Well, it would still be the same analysis even if it was just one person's demand curve. And so the implicit assumption that's driving that is something we're going to talk about more extensively later on in the class is there's an assumption of diminishing marginal utility. Now, we haven't really talked about utility yet in the class, and we're going to talk about it more. But utility is just another way of talking about the consumer's desire or satisfaction for the good. So we could also say diminishing marginal value is an assumption of consumer behavior. Okay, and it's a really interesting assumption. So what we're saying is that for somebody like Emily, her first Frappuccino, she really likes a lot. She's willing to pay a lot for it. But if this is the 17th Frappuccino, she's already had 16 this month. Maybe she's like, maybe I just had a Starbucks yesterday. Maybe I really don't need one today. She's not willing to pay as much for it, right? So that's a general feature. Not only do we assume that the highest willingness to pay consumers are the ones that purchase a good when there are multiple consumers in the market, but when there's one consumer and they're purchasing multiple units of a good, we also assume their demand curve slopes downward because as they consume more and more of the good, their value for each additional unit, each marginal unit goes down. Okay. So we end up with this other relationship, which I'll write, and this will be like the last thing that I write for today. And it's that the total social benefit is the sum of the marginal benefit across all units consumed, which is just another way of saying that we're adding up the willingness to pay of each of the consumers to get a value to society, or the total social benefit of some gift. And again, I say the word gift in quotes, but again, the thought experiment is aliens come, drop off 17 Frappuccinos. Obviously, our society is enriched. We receive some benefit from that. How do we measure that? What's the value of that resource to society? Because remember, a resource is anything with an opportunity cost. And obviously, people are willing to pay something, willing to give something up to get those Frappuccinos. So, what's the value to society? How do we measure the value to society of that alien Frappuccino gift? Well, it's the area underneath the demand curve. That's how we interpret the area underneath the demand curve. So that's the big takeaway. Hopefully you guys can see a connection between the homework where we're measuring area underneath curves and the concept of total social benefit. If you don't connect the two, you should. And I'll say to you guys,